Good morning, Caryl, Vimesh, Adam. Thank you so much for being here at Cloudera Government Forum this morning. Appreciate your coming out. And I'd like to open, if each of you could please share what your role is in your organization. And for those who are really interested in wanting to understand your mission organization, if you can also share what your missions, your organizational mission is for us, please.
Sure. So I'm Caryl Brzymialkiewicz. I'm the Chief Data Officer at the Office of Inspector General in Health and Human Services. For our overall mission, we're trying to protect the program integrity of all the programs across HHS. So if you think about Health and Human Services as an organization, it's about $1 trillion portfolio. Our office is really responsible for fighting fraud, waste, and abuse within those programs and making sure that the beneficiaries are protected and are actually getting the services that they need from those programs. My role specifically as the Chief Data Officer is to make sure that we're providing more and better data and analytics to support that oversight mission. And we're looking for ways to reduce the time it takes for our various disciplines in our office to access quality data. So we have auditors, we have evaluators, we have investigators, and attorneys within our office really trying to work towards fighting fraud, waste, and abuse, and we're looking at various ways that we can help support that.
And hi, I'm Vimesh Patel. I run the Office of Data Strategy and Innovation at the National Counterterrorism Center, NCTC as we call it for short. So a little bit about NCTC. It was established kind of after 9/11 with the job to help connect the dots. What we do is we integrate data and intelligence analysis from across the government related to terrorism and promote information sharing. So it's kind of a complicated activity because we don't actually own any of our data. We don't conduct law enforcement operations or collection. We partner with other entities in the government to obtain terrorism information and promote information sharing and analysis. My office specifically, the Office of Data Strategy and Innovation, is really trying to bring sort of analytics and help us better understand the large volumes and variety of data that we bring in. And again, it's kind of a complicated activity because it's not like we can just put together this big cloud and everybody just gives us our data. We have a lot of policies, regulatory, and compliance requirements that we have to meet. So in my office, we have three major functions. One is data acquisition policy. So we have folks who are working on the restrictions of how we can handle data, what we can do with it, what we can't do with it. We also have the data scientists. So they're folks, we forward deploy a bunch of them alongside our analysts to kind of learn what the business is and what they do and help apply their technique. And then on the back end, we have the compliance and regulatory function. So we kind of have that life cycle of data in my organization from bringing it in, using it to the best of our ability, and then of course making sure that we're meeting our obligations under law and policy to use this data in the correct manner and protect all of the civil liberties and privacy.
Adam Wilson, CEO of Trifacta. Trifacta is focused on creating a data wrangling platform that helps customers, especially in the big data and Hadoop ecosystem, to standardize, cleanse, and distill information so they can take data from raw to refined and make productive use of that data. So it's a self-service platform that really helps democratize access to a lot of the large, complex, often multi-structured data that is increasingly landing in large-scale data lakes. We work very closely with our friends here at Cloudera in order to deliver these solutions to customers in the public sector like the Department of Defense, Defense Intelligence Agency, CMS, CDC, US Mint, and others that have large-scale data challenges where they're trying to really empower end users to move much more quickly and have much more agility with the information that they're trying to analyze.
Great. Well, thank you for those introductions. So the purpose of this panel is to really understand how your organizations are using advanced analytics to benefit your organization. So would be excellent if you could please share a use case or two in how your organization is improving and benefiting from the use of advanced analytics. So Caryl, if you could start, please.
Sure. So likewise for my office, I've been in the role for about 2 years, really establishing this office and function. I have a team that you would think about, for data quality. It's a data operations team really focused in on data governance and those kinds of things. I have a team focused on strategic planning and performance management. And I also have an advanced analytics team that's really looking for how do we leverage the various data sets available to us through CMS and our partners, and then through the broader interagency that we can leverage for law enforcement purposes to really fight fraud. What I wanted to talk about is a couple of successes that we've had. Actually, the biggest one so far is an indictment that came out last fall. It was $1 billion fraud case. So there was 3 co-conspirators had figured out how to try to hide in the data, but it was really about using data analytics and partnering with DOJ and the FBI to uncover the money laundering, to understand in the data what was happening, and really understand between the providers and all of the network really what was going on. And so it was the owner, a hospital administrator, and for skilled nursing facilities, and understanding that. So for us, I'm very proud of my team to think about, right, that's $1 billion case that's been indicted. And so there's still a lot of work to do to make sure that that goes all the way through trial. We've had other cases that have already been closed where we've looked for providers that are either not providing services and putting in those claims for it, which means that's not financially sound for the program. Or there's cases where we're really concerned about patient harm. For us, it's really about partnering with our agents and understanding how to support them. So a lot of it is about, we talk about the customer experience. For us, the customers are our agents. How do we help them do their jobs more efficiently, more effectively, better, give them the information they need very quickly? And they're partnered with, my team has got some fantastic statisticians, data modelers, and that kind of talent on our team. But it's really comparing the field intelligence that we're getting, right? What's happening within a local area with what our folks are seeing in the data, and how do you make that relationship work to really enable our investigators to go after these really big cases. So we're really fortunate. I know when we talk about Medicare fraud, we actually have strike forces located throughout the country, because there's some places that are they're really problematic. If you were to look at the level of payments compared to anywhere else in the country, it's disproportionately higher. And so right, Miami, that tends to be a hotbed. I think some of y'all have probably seen the story about Fareed Fata that was in Michigan a couple years ago, an oncologist actually giving patients cancer treatment when they did not in fact have cancer. So those kinds of stories, we're looking at ways that we can leverage data to help inform those decisions about cases, to give our agents as much information as possible, as quickly as possible, and that's how we're trying to drive operational changes.
I think one of the ways that we try to operate in my organization at NCTC is we pair a lot with the analysts and the workforce at large. And I tell my folks that we're looking for kind of a 1 or 2 efficiencies. So one is if we see someone who's identified a process or a way of work, and we can add sort of 10x the value, right? If we can do something in an hour that'll take them 10 hours, that's the sweet spot for us. We'll go after that. The other piece is enabling our folks to do things in ways that just humans couldn't, even with an enormous amount of time. So my world, as you can imagine, it's really hard to kind of give you a very specific use case or a specific example of exactly what it is that we do. But our general, guidelines are sort of those. It's, let's look at what we're doing today. Let's try and make that better. Sort of make the horse go faster if you understand the optimization piece there. But the other piece is we kind of sit back and we take a look and say, what is your job to be done? Not what you do, but what is it that you're trying to achieve, and how can we use data analytics or data science or some of our developers to kind of help you kind of get really far into that and do things in ways that we never imagined. I'd say sometimes we're really successful, sometimes we're not. Overlaying all that, again, I probably couldn't say enough about it, is the fact that we operate in a very sort of regulatory and compliant environment. We have data that we have to be very careful how we use, and it makes it complicated because we can't sort of code these restrictions up. So our analysts go through a lot of training. We have to very carefully understand what it is we can and can't, either by law or policy or memorandum with the data. So we don't just sort of roll up our sleeves and unlock ourselves into trying to do anything we can, but we work very closely as a team, and we work very closely in watching what our analysts do and working to enable them.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to talk about enabling the analyst, and really in both of the examples that you gave, the observation that we see across the roughly 7,000 customers we work with is that you're really seeing that 70 to 80% of the work that goes into most of these analytic projects is actually, getting the data fit for purpose. Once you get something that's nice, clean rows and columns, driving analytics on that or running predictive models on that, is a reasonably straightforward process. But most of the time, goes to what we affectionately think of as the janitorial work with the data. And so, our focus and our mission working with customers is really to help, expedite that process by allowing the people who actually know the data best to do that work. The people who have the context in their heads to get eyes on data very early in a process and do the structuring and the shaping and the cleansing and the transforming so they can get moving. And we had a chance to work with the CDC on a project that I think really illustrated that in a pretty profound way. So there was an outbreak of HIV in rural Indiana a few years ago, and they were really puzzled by this, sort of what was happening, and it was something that was very time sensitive. And you can imagine the types of data that has to get stitched together to really diagnose that and to do root cause on that is everything from medical records, which are often very unstructured and formatted in different ways, geospatial data, demographic data from the region, research that's coming out of the labs, statistical trends, as well as other data types that had to very quickly kind of come together so that the people who were responsible for tracking down what was going on and trying to analyze this further could make productive use of that data and then ultimately get in and start to make some changes to correct the issues that were occurring. So, time is of the essence in those situations, and the ability to work with a multitude of very diverse data and to allow people who really are the experts in whatever the issue is to get deeply involved right from the beginning and doing a lot of discovery and helping that process is ultimately impacting people's lives. And so we see that play out in big and small ways across a number of different agencies. Sometimes it's looking at things like financial fraud, and other times it's understanding what's going on with the flow of money. But in other cases, it's literally looking at health and trying to understand how data can really impact and how agencies can intercede to prevent an outbreak from spreading further. So.
Great, thank you. So as you've employed these advanced analytic solutions in your environments, it's fascinating to hear the differences and the similarities, but I'm really curious, overall, as you've developed these analytics approaches, have there been any surprising outcomes or insights that you've gained that could benefit the audience in hearing more about? So any kinds of accomplishments or insights along the way?
So I think for me, one of the most surprising things, we talk about this a lot, but it kind of came front and center again, was making sure that you are expressing your data in a way that your customers can understand. So people talk about data analytics, they'll use that buzz phrase, they'll talk about data visualization. With our predictive analytics, it was really trying to figure out, right, for me the surprising thing was, right, this billion-dollar case. It was enabled by having access to CMS's system, which is fantastic. That's sitting on, it's a petabyte's worth of information that we also needed to combine with other data sets. So you have the data interoperability, you have structured and unstructured data you have to pull together. But then it was really also the translation, right? If the team is pulling together all this robust analysis, and then we're not figuring out a way to enable our agent to talk to the prosecutors to then convince a jury, then we have failed them. And so for me, the surprising part was how easily people can look at data in different ways if you give them the right tools and ask the right questions so that they can tell that story. Because all of this is about the so what of the data, right? So to me, it's kind of a surprise, but not really. We talk about that a lot, but really seeing that operational impact of what people can do if you arm them with the right tools and with the right graphics and visuals about that data, what they're able to do with it.
I think for us, one of the surprises, I don't know if it's a surprise or not, but it's, there is a lot of power in sort of putting all this data together and writing great analytics on it. But in my world, all the data is never together. It's never all in one place. It never will be for a variety of reasons. And so we have to look at solutions on how to how to work with that and still do it in a really, really smart way. So I'm sure, you guys are all smarter than me, but the math is really easy, right? You put all the data in one place, you can do all kinds of great things, and it's really easy. When the data's not all in one place, it gets a little bit more complicated. Overlay again on top of that, the fact that IT systems today are great with things like security. They'll make sure that I can only see the things I'm allowed to, protect data from all kinds of unauthorized use and access. But at the same time, when you overlay things like policy and accepted use of data, those aren't really there baked into the systems today. So we have to figure out how to overlay that on top. And the way we do that today is through a great close sort of collaboration and partnership across everyone in NCTC, but specifically in my organization. So I think that's one of our big challenges. Another sort of insight is what I'll call sort of entity resolution. That's if I have a piece of information on John over here and a piece of information on John over here, how can I be certain that is in fact the same John? In a lot of industries, you get that wrong, no big deal. In mine, yeah, that's a really, really big deal. So that's something that's still very human intensive for all the right reasons it is. But in other industries, I think you take a little risk there. In mine, we just can't.
Great. So this question is for you, Caryl, with health and human services in mind. Have you found ways to save resources, identify gaps, or demonstrate areas for operational improvement to basically share information in a more meaningful way? And also, in addition to that, have there been noteworthy applications of advanced analytics that have made a difference in how your business and mission objectives are met?
Absolutely. So I think in talking to other chief data officers throughout the government and the private sector too, I'm really lucky that I have these three functions with the strategic planning and performance management as well. So working with our leadership team and kind of the managers across the organization to figure out what are the priorities of the organization. We are so focused on kind of this external mission, but it was really taking that thinking and the discipline and applying it to our own internal data, or just focus inwards a little bit to really get more of that internal efficiency. And understanding then with the same thing with all these systems that had grown up over time, right? So federal IT procurement practices and processes, right? There's just a bunch of legacy systems. Thinking about all those data stores and really seeing it then, flipping it as it truly is an asset, and how do we look at it in different ways to then talk about how we are meeting our priority objectives of what we're trying to achieve. What are the outcomes associated with that? What are the outputs and activities that we are doing to try to drive that, to really drive this positive change that we're trying to achieve? I mean, for us, I know the lights are a little blinding, but if I were to ask you, how many of you are happy when you see an inspector general come to your door, right? For us, it's really then about following up. If we really think it's strong that we want to put a recommendation in a report, we want folks to take action on it. We're not doing it just to write a report, right? That's not the point. The point is that there's a program vulnerability that we've identified, and we want to work with the agency to figure out how to close that loop, how to close that vulnerability. In some cases, it means actually trying to seek legislation, right? Because then that's a bigger challenge. I know I talked about the law enforcement cases, because for us, that's, I know a lot of my team works directly with them in the predictive analytics, and so they get the immediate, right, you're holding wrongdoers accountable, and you're going after them in another sense, but the reports are just as important. Right? We're looking at national trends. We collaborated with some of our evaluators to put out data briefs so we could talk about questionable billing measures so that we could share with the public some of the things that we were seeing too. It's really important to figure out how to get that information out there. And there's already a lot from open data initiatives. There's a lot of information available, but I think at this point there's almost so much information. It's a question of where do you start? So for us, the internal efficiencies was, how do we start to organize all these streams of information, all the different systems that we have? How do we begin to overlay it so that we can actually start to focus in on those big priority areas? And I know for us, some of the things that we're really focusing on right now are still about the opioid epidemic. So there's a lot already going on across the country. There was a national strategy before. There's still a lot of energy. This administration is still focused in on it. For us, it's about figuring out the part that we have to play. Are we doing as much as we can to help make sure that we are preventing, detecting, and enforcing anything we see related to prescription drug abuse and diversion, right? So I think there was an article that came out a couple weeks ago that talked about if you have a prescription given to you for 3 days, you have a certain percentage chance of becoming addicted within a year later. And the interesting insight was that if you got a 7-dose instead of a 3-dose, your chances of being addicted a year later doubled. So the things that we were looking at were, right, if you're looking at the data, if you get a 30-day supply of a drug, and 10 days later you're getting another 30-day supply, and 10 days later you're getting another 30-day supply, right? Our investigators would call that a clue. And what we're trying to look at then are what are the program vulnerabilities that allow that, and what are the different data sets you can see. So I think for us, it's really been great to try to figure out other ways. There's folks would call it business intelligence. That's not necessarily the tool that we think about today, but really it's how do you tell that story about what are all the things that you're doing? What were your priorities that you said you were trying to do? What does your strategic plan look like? How do you make sure you're tracking that so you have strategic alignment of your organization towards that end, because you are meeting the mission, you are having that impact, and how do you circle around, not only tell that story, but if you need to pivot, how do you need to pivot? For us being a national, we have about 80 offices throughout the country. So with a national workforce, it's also about making sure what are the folks that you're seeing in California, how does that relate to what the folks are seeing in Florida and in Georgia? How do we put all those pieces together in a different way? So I know for us it's been a big effort, not only for structuring our priorities and making sure that we're tracking the right things related to that, but also then focusing on the nitty-gritty, down in the weeds. What's the data governance associated with it? So if we put this information in front of people and they're making decisions, we know we can trust it. And that's not always the sexiest thing for people to talk about. And if you go in talking about data quality, then everyone goes like, oh yeah, of course. But you show them some examples of a tool you've built and you said, look, I'm trying to put data at your fingertips. I'm trying to empower you, and here's a fundamental challenge. I found that we've gotten a lot of momentum and a lot of support to keep us moving forward to help us improve our effectiveness and efficiency.
Thank you, that's tremendous. And it's really promising that you're able to capture such great areas to improve for HHS. So I appreciate you sharing that, Caryl. So this question is for you, Adam. I know that you did comment on some of the work that Trifacta has been doing with the CDC, which is tremendous. From an industry perspective, are there other examples of that you found that show how applying big data analytics to government information leads to tangible results? And if you can, share an example or two of those use cases that are relevant to public sector.
Sure. Yeah, I think a lot of it stems from this idea that we've really got this impedance mismatch that's kind of arisen in the last several years. So, with the
Oh, your mic.
sorry.
Thank you.
Better? Okay. All right. So, one of the things that we've really seen is this impedance mismatch that's kind of been created in terms of the data supply chain. So, with the advent of, technologies like, Hadoop and big data more generally, the economics around storage and processing have completely changed. Cloud has also had a dramatic impact on that. And, at the same time, you've seen, again, this Cambrian explosion of BI, visualization, analytic, and algorithmic tools that are out there. And what we've found is that you have a growing number of knowledge workers. By most estimates, by 2020, there's going to be 450 million people who would be classified as knowledge workers in the economy. And you have often a flat, and in some cases, shrinking number of people who are technically qualified to really provision data for those individuals. And those knowledge workers, really believe it is their inalienable right now to have data to make better decisions. And so, sort of, how do you fix that, right? How do you think about, the 500,000 kind of data engineers that are out there, or the, let's call it 200,000 proper data scientists that are out there? Like, if you can't figure out a way to shift some of this work, to those knowledge workers and to help them get productive, then very quickly, the organization starts to grind to a halt, and you're not really able to leverage the collective talents of all the people that you have out there. The interesting thing too that we've seen is that the people that are in the agencies that are responsible for managing a lot of these processes and ultimately responsible for a lot of the enforcing the regulations or being involved, like, they actually really understand how the data gets used to make decisions, and really, if you can shift the work to them, The nice part is they're going to thank you for that because they're going to go faster. And they're probably pretty good at it because they actually have that context. And so we think that's really, really important. So really we see a lot of our customers really attacking this data supply chain problem by really taking a lot of the work that heretofore was always the kind of exclusive purview of only the highly technical and really democratizing that. So really thinking about democratizing production as much as democratizing consumption of data. And we see that play out in a number of the different agencies that we're working with. So, whether it's, situations like, at NMEC where, we're looking at all the media assets that get collected and that data gets harvested so that you can start to understand, is there sensitive information on any of these devices that, might need to be classified in a specific way or that might need to be followed up on as appropriate. You can imagine the diversity of the data, the volume and complexity of that data that lands in those environments. And what you want to do is get people to get eyes on that information who really understand, what sensitive means, and what's the proper response to that sensitive data. And so, we see examples like that all the time where we're really trying to fast forward a lot of the things that used to be very require lots of coding, lots of scripting, lots of very time-consuming preparation of the data, and really hand that over to the analysts and the end users that ultimately can very quickly get eyes on the data and do work with it. We saw that play out also, at CMS and work we were doing where they were really stitching together, data from lots of disparate sources to look for evidence of fraud coming across a number of different reporting mechanism across different regions and geographies. We've seen that as the U.S. Mint is tracking money flow through the country and understanding how that works as well. And so I think, the common example in all of these is lots of diversity, lots of volume, leveraging the machine learning, but also recognizing that there have to be affordances for the human or the expert to be involved, because in order to make the data fit for purpose for whatever that algorithm is or whatever that reporting is that you're trying to do, at some point a person makes a decision, and that's human in the loop aspect is really, really critical. And so, we see that broadly in industry, but we certainly see that, in public sector and in federal with a lot of the use cases that we work on in conjunction with Cloudera. So.
Thank you. I like that visual as well of democratizing the data to better inform those knowledge workers, as you mentioned, who really can make sense of that information. So Vimesh, with your role at National Counterterrorism Center, I was wondering if you could share with us what do you consider essential for your data analytics strategy, and how do you measure and sustain that strategy and basically understand if that implementation of that strategy has been effective for your organization at NCTC?
Sure. Excuse me. I started this position about a year ago, and my first data strategy was to build a big cloud and make a little button that said "Find Terrorists," and you hit the button, and out comes all our receipt printer, right? Everything that we ever need to know. So that lasted, about 7 minutes or so before I realized that wasn't going to work. And I'll tell you a story. If you guys remember, maybe around 2012, there was a bunch of articles about Target. They had done a bunch of data science, and they found that women who were buying unscented lotion and vitamins and supplements were a good indicator of the fact that at some point in the near future, they were going to be buying cribs and strollers and things like that. Very lucrative market. So Target started sending out coupons. They sent out a coupon to this young lady whose father went into the store and said, "Why are you sending this to my daughter? She's not pregnant. This is ridiculous." And the answer was, it actually turned out that she was pregnant. Target knew it before the father did. So I'll tell you that if we could model terrorist behavior today, it would be different tomorrow. And so that's a really big challenge and something that's obviously kind of scary for anyone who works in the counterterrorism community. Just in the last year, we've seen things like homegrown violent extremism, which me personally, I would never have imagined could occur, and now we see it, right? It's an occurrence, and it happens more than anytime it happens, I think would be really bad. So we quickly kind of evolved our strategy. Some of it kind of goes to democratizing the data. I want to make sure that someone at NCTC who needs data, it's available to them. They're not afraid to use it. If they need help, it's there. And I'll say it one more time, they're not afraid to use it because sometimes, again, we have this really complicated regulatory requirement and making sure that we are protecting this data and using it only for the right reasons. That gets a little bit tough sometimes. And so that's kind of one of the big focuses of our data strategy. How can we do that? When we talk about return on investment, how do we measure success? Obviously, there's a great indicator, a great metric would be, the counterterrorism community number of terrorist incidents. That's a really tough metric, right? The American people, I think, want to have 0. I do too. Every time we have an incident somewhere that causes harm, right? That makes us all a little sad. That puts a little weight on our shoulders. But to us, when terrorists pivot, when they change and the behavior changes, how quickly can we leverage this data and enable our analysts to pivot? The faster we can innovate around them, the faster we can get in front of these things. And so we don't have a good sort of numeric metric on what our strategy, the effectiveness of our strategy, but that's kind of the driving force that we follow.
Thank you for sharing that. And yeah, I like that predictive anecdote with Target. So that's interesting to model. So Caryl, this is for you. With the vast amount of data available, how do you separate the signal from the noise and derive actionable insights that help with the decision-making within OIG at HHS?
So it's a challenging problem, and it always will be. I think Vimesh just said this, right? It's interesting, right? Very different worlds, very similar problems, both related to data and analytics, right? And so in the same case, when you're trying to separate the signal from the noise, on one hand, I tell my team to think about this, that as much as we like to think of ourselves as, right, that I'm proud of the team that we've pulled together and the tools that we have, that, right, we've got the smartest data scientists and we've got the best statisticians, and we've got fantastic lawyers in our organization, right, the best auditors, investigators. On the flip side, I like to think about the other team that, like, kind of the opposing team has the same kind of skill set that they pulled together or that they're trying to. Right? So it's how do you try to stay a step ahead of that? How do you make sure that your models, you're continually updating it? So for us, right, following the signal and the noise means sifting through a petabyte's worth of information. And the same thing, right, I could ask you the question, how many of you understand your medical bills? Right? So in the Medicare and Medicaid world, parking Medicaid aside for a minute, even in the Medicare world, there's a lot of different claims, right, within your claims form, there's a lot of different codes. So if you're trying to understand those codes and what's happening and the sequence of that, there's a lot of filtering to be done. So both on CMS, putting in a fraud prevention system, and then our side looking at the predictive analytics and combining with other information that we can, really what it means to separate the signal from the noise is sifting through a lot of information very quickly to figure out what are the parameters that we think are correlated, and then how do we optimize our models to try to get at that and really learn as quickly as we can, right, with our training models and everything else. So comparing it against, right, outcomes, right, what was a case that we know actually went to trial and was prosecuted and the person was convicted, and understanding that big picture. And what it means is rapidly learning and rapidly adapting. And then for me, it means as, the team lead trying to figure out how do I help my team do that even more? How do we stay ahead with the tools that we have? I know I have a great partner in our CIO, and that's not always the case for everybody, where they've got a great partnership between, I'm focused on the data and analytics, and I've got a great partner that's focused on our infrastructure. So we're already thinking about, right, and we're in the process of evolving our infrastructure. How do we get the best talent coming in now that they're graduating out of schools? So if they're used to using open source tools and a cloud-based platform, how do we in the government make sure that we're enabling that so when they come in the door, they can help add value on day one? And so thinking about that actual value versus the perceived or intentional value, How do you stay ahead so that it's not just catching up? The challenge is really, how do you really truly get ahead when you have all of this information to sift through? But I come back to that, it's that predictive analytics, and as much as we can do with machine learning. I know there's a lot of tools out there. We've been trying to stay ahead and understanding what's going on. There's just still a lot to be done. And then it's figuring out how do you tailor that. And you talk about the specific knowledge workers, when you have this very complex program, how do you take the tools and then put it in your framework so that it can apply, right, to Vimesh and his team? And then in our world, how do we make that happen? And it's a big challenge.
Great, thank you. So this is a summary question for the three of you to answer, if you would please. So based on your recent experiences, are there recommendations that you could share to help motivate everyone, whether they be pitfalls that you've encountered that you've turned around, any kind of missed expectations, or perhaps expectations that were put into a positive light for those surprising quick wins that you've encountered along the way in your roles?
Sorry. You can tell we're following a pattern here. Right? So one thing I wanted to say is I encourage us all to remember that even sometimes people see data as like a back office function, right? Or the analytics, they'll just say, go get the data, as if it's this easy thing to do. Wasn't it already packaged and you can just do something with it? Feel comfortable and embrace the fact that we are change agents for our organization. We are. And when we talk about the Office of Innovation, whatever that title means, really enabling your team to be innovative and to take a little bit of risk in whatever approach, whatever tool, and finding a way to get to yes. I mean, I'm proud of my team for staying focused on the mission and being customer service oriented and continuing to get that dialogue and continuing to iterate. So, any pitfall that we had was thinking in the beginning, when I walked in the door, I saw some great models that were in a spreadsheet. And all of our investigators, we got some head nods like, this is great work. And then after the fact, some special agents in charge came up to me and I said, I have no idea what he just told me, right? Okay, got it, I know what I need to work on. But continuing to embrace that there are better ways always of doing something, and it doesn't mean it's a ding on the work that happened, because it was brilliant to get to where we are, and now it's just a matter of tweaking it. So I usually laugh that, right, I have to be, in my roles, it's the cheerleader for data analytics in the organization. It's really being that ambassador to support the team, because this work is so incredibly important to everything else that we can do. And it's seeing the potential of where it can go, and also recognizing the value it's already bringing and being the voice to that. But if there was anything, just to tell you, just embrace the fact that you are a change agent for your organization. Sometimes that's, I'll talk about us being the polite agitators, being a little bit more aggressive than not, but it's really critical from, don't underestimate change management related to any of these things. So, my final thought.
I think so many of my thoughts match yours, Caryl. I think of this sort of triad between, we have what we call our mission folks, and we have IT. And so mission says, I want something that looks like this, and your traditional IT partner in our organization will say, okay, well, I'll build you exactly that. From that changing perspective, there's this role, I think commercial industry kind of knows this really well, but it's that product innovator who kind of says, well, I see what you're trying to do, and I think I can do something that's really, really different. So you're almost sort of ignoring what your customer is telling you, right, for the hope and the dream that you're going to do something that's even more incredible. That change agent piece is really hard inside the government, I guess, ultimately. And so I'm constantly doing this. I'm talking to my leadership about the fact that we can't keep scaling what we do by just adding more people, right? We have to bring more technology in it. We'll have folks that'll come to my data scientists and say, hey, I got this Excel spreadsheet. I need you to sort of flip it this way and make it look like this, and make it turn red. And we turn those things down. Yes, we absolutely have the skill set to do it, but that's not our role in NCTC, right? It's really to try and help us get even farther down the road. So there's this kind of natural tension between us and our IT partners and our mission, and I think it's a really good thing, right? It does keep healthy change. So that's, I think, something to think about in the government. The other piece, lesson learned, is really kind of bringing together your IT data strategy and your policy and regulatory data strategy. They really have to work together hand in hand. This great idea of, hey, let's build this big cloud, we'll put all the data in there and everyone can have it and do whatever they want with. And the government, especially in my world, that's just not reality. So we try to think of that from the ground up. Every moment that we start thinking about what are we going to do with this data and how are we going to do it, our team's looking at that and saying, well, how can we make that happen? What do we need to put in place to make sure that we're putting in all the protections that we want and allowing maximal use of it? Thinking about it that way, right, from day one, not looking at the technology and then trying to overlay policy and compliance on top of it has probably been one of the ways we've been really effective in my organization.
Yeah, I guess, it's interesting. As we were chatting about all this, I was thinking, a little bit about, there's the famous Darwin quote about survival of the fittest, and a lot of people have, interpreted that to mean the strongest and the fastest, survive. And if you really read the quote, what it actually talks about is those who are the most adaptable end up surviving. And I think what we're seeing is that a lot of adaptation right now is all about information agility, because we really compete on information now as much as the goods and services that we make and provide. And it's the organizations that can welcome uncertainty into their business and cater to long tail segments in their market and address the needs of their users in new and interesting ways by creating data products that previously didn't exist, that ultimately have strategic advantage. And so I think sort of embrace that aspect as well, and embrace the idea that gone are the days where it takes 6 months to add a table to a database so you can actually look at something and make a decision. That needs to happen in clicks, and if it doesn't, then you're going to get lapped, right? And that adaptability is not going to be there. That's absolutely essential. And so I kind of combine that with a study that McKinsey did in 2011, where they said, big data will be the next frontier for competition in the next decade. And I went back and had a chance to meet the folks who authored that study, and I said, okay, it's 2017, like, how's it going? And he said, the results are pretty uneven. You really see some organizations that have sort of figured it out and are really creating distance. And you see a lot of organizations who sort of looked at Hadoop and big data in particular and said, okay, this is great because I'll offload some stuff and save some money. And they're not using these data lakes as something strategic that can really drive business value. And the biggest challenge is getting users and use cases that are actually able to demonstrate that value. And so I think a lot of what we focus on, and I think what the industry has been focusing on increasingly, is how do we create tool chains and capabilities that really help organizations to leverage these data assets now that are coming together and being, very multi-structured, very large environments. How do we help people get productive with that information? How do we expose it to more users? And as I said before, really move beyond just democratization of consumption of that data and really start thinking about democratization of production of new and interesting data assets that will allow you to adapt and change and to go fast. And that type of information agility, I think, is what we're seeing is separating the winners from the losers, in this kind of next generation.
Thank you. So it seems like there are a few common themes that we've talked about. Being the change agent, communicating the mission or the business value, basically making sure that your alignment of your IT systems, your policy, and what missions you have are all well coordinated, as well as adapting to the environment. So I appreciate your time today. Dr. Caryl Brzymialkiewicz of Health and Human Services, Vimesh Patel of National Counterterrorism Center. Thank you both, Caryl and Vimesh, for your government service. It is deeply appreciated and admirable, the work that you do every day. And Adam Wilson of Trifacta, thank you so much for Trifacta's partnership with Cloudera. It is tremendous. And once again, I wanted to make sure that all of the partners of Cloudera are thanked at this time for Cloudera Government Forum. And let's stay in touch and keep the communication going. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.